Imagine this. You are standing on sun-scorched stone, the Mediterranean heat baking the iron inside your armor until it burns your skin. Below you, the sea is no longer blue. It is black with ships. Hundreds of them. Their sails blot out the horizon like storm clouds. And then, the cannon fires. Not with iron. Not with stone. But with a human head. It smashes into the enemy line, bursts apart, and for half a second the world goes silent. Here is the impossible question. How does a force of barely 7,000 defenders survive against 40,000 of the most ruthless soldiers on Earth? When every rule of war says they should be erased in days. You think you know the Siege of Malta. You don't. Because what you're about to hear was so brutal, so humiliating, and so horrifying. That history quietly looked away. And by the end of this story, you will understand why even hardened Ottoman veterans said, "This was not a siege. This was hell." Stay with me. Because in the next hour, you're going to witness 5 moments that sound like lies. You'll see how a single knight, old, sick, and half-blind, turns human bodies into weapons. How an elite invasion force breaks not from hunger or disease, but from fear. How a forgotten medieval trick buys weeks of survival when hours were all that remained. How victory is snatched from absolute extinction. And how the true aftermath of Malta was buried, because Europe didn't want to admit what it took to win. But first, you need to feel the despair. Because before the blood, before the madness, before the miracle, there is only waiting. And dread. You are on Malta in the year 1565. The island looks harmless. Low hills. Dry rock. A few forts clinging to the coastline like broken teeth. But to the Ottoman Empire, this place is a dagger pointed at the heart of their sea. For decades, the Knights of St. John, warrior monks exiled from Rhodes, have turned Malta into a nest of pirates. They raid Ottoman shipping. They capture pilgrims bound for Mecca. They sell prisoners into slavery. Every raid is a public humiliation. Every captured ship is a slap in the face of the Sultan himself. And now, the Sultan has decided to end it. 40,000 men are coming. Janissaries, elite infantry trained from childhood to kill without hesitation. Sipahis, armored cavalry who have crushed armies across 3 continents. Artillery crews with the most advanced cannons in the world. Engineers who know how to peel fortresses apart stone by stone. Their commanders are legends. Mustafa Pasha, cold, disciplined, ruthless. Piali Pasha, master of the Ottoman fleet. And with them, the most feared man alive. Turgut Reis. Dragut. A pirate admiral whose name alone has emptied towns along the Mediterranean coast. And inside Malta, 7,000 defenders. That's everyone. Knights. Spanish infantry. Italian mercenaries. Local militia. Old men. Teenage boys. They are led by one man. Jean de Valette. He is 70 years old. His beard is white. His body is scarred from decades of war. He walks with pain that never leaves him. And he knows something the Ottomans don't. If Malta falls, there is no next line of defense. Southern Italy is exposed. Rome is within reach. The balance of power in Europe collapses. This isn't just about an island. This is about whether the Mediterranean becomes an Ottoman lake. And Valette knows the truth no one else wants to say out loud. They cannot win. They can only survive long enough for help to arrive. If help arrives, every night before the siege begins, the defenders hear the same sound. The wind. It carries the smell of the sea. And something else. Fear. Men lie awake listening to waves slap against stone, wondering which fort will be hit first. Wondering how long before the walls crumble. Wondering if death will come by blade, fire, or slow starvation. Some pray. Some drink. Some sharpen swords that will break after the first few blows. And Valette. Valette walks the walls. He speaks to every man who will listen. Looks them in the eye. And says nothing comforting. Because he will not lie. He tells them this will be worse than Rhodes. Worse than anything they have faced before. And if they break, there will be no mercy. Now listen carefully, because this is where the first human story begins. On the Ottoman side, there is a janissary named Ali. He is 19 years old. He was taken from his Christian family as a child, converted, trained, and molded into a weapon of the state. He believes in the empire. He believes in destiny. He believes Malta will fall in days. When the fleet appears on the horizon, Ali feels pride. This is history, and he is part of it. The ships anchor. The army disembarks. Tents spread across the hills like a living organism. Drums beat. Orders are shouted. Cannons are dragged into position. From the walls of Fort St. Elmo, the defenders watch in silence. They are outnumbered 6-1. And then, the first cannon fires. The siege has begun. Fort St. Elmo is small. Too small. It guards the entrance to Malta's Grand Harbour, and Valette knows something awful. If St. Elmo falls quickly, the Ottomans can bring their fleet inside, and the rest of the island is doomed. So he makes a choice that horrifies his own men. He decides to sacrifice the fort. Not abandon it. Sacrifice it. He orders the garrison to hold until the last man if necessary. They obey. Because that is what knights do. Day after day, Ottoman artillery pounds the fort. Stone explodes. Dust fills the air. Men are buried alive under collapsing walls. At night, the defenders repair damage with bare hands. They sleep in armor. Eat hard bread soaked in blood and sweat. Drink water that tastes of rust and smoke. Ali watches the bombardment with confidence. This is how sieges end. But then, something doesn't happen. The fort doesn't fall. Day after day passes. Bodies pile up. And the janissaries are ordered to assault. Ali climbs ladders under fire. He hears screams as boiling oil pours down. He sees men split open by cannonballs. And still, the defenders fight. After 3 weeks, Fort St. Elmo is a ruin. No wall stands higher than a man. The garrison is dying. And yet, they refuse to surrender. This is where the Ottomans make their first mistake. They are angry. They are insulted. And they decide to send a message. When the fort finally falls, they kill every surviving defender. Every man. They cut off their heads. They crucify their bodies. And then, they load the heads into cannons. And fire them across the harbor. That is the moment you imagined at the start. Human skulls slamming into stone. Faces smashed beyond recognition. Blood spraying across the ramparts. The message is clear. This is what awaits you. And inside the city, Jean de Valette watches it happen. He does not flinch. He orders the same done in return. Ottoman prisoners are beheaded. Their bodies are tied to boards. And floated back to the enemy camp. This is no longer a siege. It is a war of terror. And now, the real nightmare begins. Because Fort St. Elmo has done its job. It bought time. But at a cost that cannot be paid again. The Ottomans turn their full attention to the main defences. Burgu. Sengli. The heart of Malta. And Valette knows. The next assault will decide everything. But before we go there, you need to understand the man at the center of this storm. Because Act 2 is where this story stops being about armies. And becomes about one human being pushed beyond what should be possible. And what Valette endured before Malta. Explains why he will do things here that shock even his own side. You think you've seen brutality? Wait. Just wait. Before Malta became a graveyard. Before cannon smoke choked the sky. Before human heads were turned into ammunition. Jean de Valette had already lived through hell. And if you want to understand why he refused to surrender, why he chose annihilation over mercy, you have to go back. Way back. Imagine being young again. Strong. Confident. Certain that God is on your side. Valette was born into nobility in southern France, but he did not grow up soft. From his teenage years, he was trained for one purpose only. War in the name of faith. The Knights of St. John were not ceremonial monks. They were professional killers wrapped in religious vows. You fought. You bled. You obeyed. And Valette was good at it. Too good. He fought across the Mediterranean against pirates, corsairs, and Ottoman fleets. He boarded enemy ships hand-to-hand, where battles were decided by inches and seconds. He learned the sound a man makes when a blade punctures a lung. He learned how panic spreads faster than fire. And then, he learned what it meant to lose. In 1541, Valette was captured. Not defeated. Captured. Taken prisoner by Barbary corsairs allied with the Ottomans. And for the next year, he was a slave. Picture this. Chains biting into your wrists. Salt water on open wounds. The constant stink of human waste and rotting food. Valette was forced to row a galley. Hour after hour. Day after day. The whip did not ask questions. It did not care who you were. Every missed stroke meant pain. Every slowdown meant blood. Men collapsed at the oars and were beaten until they moved again. Or thrown overboard when they didn't. Valette watched men die like animals. Some begged. Some screamed. Some simply went quiet. And every night, as his muscles shook uncontrollably, he learned something crucial. The Ottomans did not respect weakness. They exploited it. When Valette was finally ransomed and returned to the Knights, he was not the same man. He was colder. Harder. He had seen what awaited those who lost. And he swore something silently. Never again. Now fast forward to 1565. Valette is Grand Master of the Order. He knows the Ottoman commanders personally. He knows their methods. He knows how they think. And most importantly, he knows fear. Not the fear of dying. The fear of captivity. Which is why, when the siege begins, he gives an order that terrifies his own men. There will be no surrender. Not for forts. Not for cities. Not for wounded knights. If you are captured, you are already dead. And now, as Fort St. Elmo lies in ruins, Valette prepares for the real test. The Ottomans reposition their guns. Their engineers move closer, trench by trench, night by night. They dig. They build platforms. They calculate angles. This is not a reckless army. This is a machine. And on one sweltering morning, the cannons open up again. Burgu and Sengli are hit with everything the Ottomans have. Stone bursts apart like rotten wood. Church towers collapse. Homes turn into rubble. Inside the city, civilians run screaming through narrow streets. Women clutch children. Priests shout prayers that are drowned out by explosions. And Valette. Valette stands in full armor on the ramparts. Every man can see him. Every man knows. If the old man is still standing, so must they. Now let's meet the second human story. His name is Matteo. He is a Maltese fisherman. Not a knight. Not a soldier. Just a man who knows the sea. When the siege began, Matteo could have fled inland. He didn't. Instead, he joined the militia. He is given a spear that's taller than he is. And told to stand a wall. On the first day of bombardment, Matteo watches his neighbor's house vanish in a cloud of dust. On the second day, he helps pull bodies from rubble. On the third day, he stops counting the dead. By the fourth day, the Ottomans assault. Ladders go up. Shields lock together. Drums beat faster. Matteo's hands shake so badly he can barely grip his spear. And then the enemy is on the wall. This is not a battle like you see in movies. There is no space. No clean swings. It is pushing. Shoving. Stabbing blindly. Matteo feels his spear hit something soft. He pulls back and sees blood. A man screams in a language he doesn't understand. Matteo vomits. Then keeps fighting. Because there is nowhere to run. The assault is repelled. Barely. The wall holds. And the defenders cheer. But Valette does not. Because he sees what others don't. The Ottomans are testing. Learning. Measuring weaknesses. And then comes the day everything nearly ends. The Ottomans launch a massive coordinated assault on Sengli. Boats packed with soldiers attempt to cross the harbor under covering fire. If they succeed, the city is split in half. Valette throws everything he has at them. Cannon fire, arquebuses, stones, boiling liquids. And then, a single Maltese gun crew fires a perfectly timed shot. The cannonball smashes into the packed boats. Men are torn apart. The harbor turns red. The assault collapses. The defenders believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, they can survive. This is the first false ending. Because what happens next is worse. Dragut arrives. The legendary admiral finally joins the siege. And with him comes experience, precision, relentless pressure. He positions artillery in places no one expected. He identifies weak angles in the walls. And slowly, the defenses begin to crack. On one afternoon, a cannonball explodes near Dragut himself. He is struck, fatally wounded. The Ottomans are stunned. Their greatest commander is dying. The defenders cheer. This should be the turning point. It isn't. Dragut's death enrages the Ottoman army. Assaults intensify. Losses are ignored. Men are thrown forward like fuel into a fire. Inside Burgu, the defenders are exhausted. They have been fighting for weeks. Sleep comes in minutes, not hours. Wounds fester. Water is rationed. Food is barely edible. And Valette is wounded. A musket ball shatters his leg armor. Fragments tear into his flesh. Blood pours down into his boot. He refuses to leave the wall. He refuses treatment. He ties a cloth around the wound and keeps walking. Because he knows, if he collapses, everything collapses. Now let me take you back to Ali, the young janissary. He no longer believes this will be quick. He has seen friends die screaming on ladders. He has smelled the stench of bodies left to rot in the sun. He has watched defenders fight with the desperation of men who know they will not be spared. And something begins to unsettle him. These men don't fight like doomed soldiers. They fight like executioners. During one assault, Ali makes it onto the wall. He locks eyes with a knight whose armor is dented, blackened, barely holding together. The knight does not shout, does not hesitate. He simply steps forward and drives a dagger into Ali's comrade's throat. Blood sprays across Ali's face. The knight smiles. Ali survives. Barely. That night, he cannot sleep. And for the first time in his life, he is afraid. Not of dying, but of what these men are willing to do. Weeks pass. Walls are breached. Counterattacks push the Ottomans back. Then more breaches. Then more counterattacks. The island is bleeding out. And then, one morning, a breach opens so wide it cannot be sealed. Ottoman soldiers pour in. The fighting moves into the streets. Hand to hand. Door to door. This is the lowest point. This is where history says Malta should fall. Valette gathers the remaining knights. There are barely a few hundred left. Many are wounded. Some can barely stand. And Valette says something extraordinary. He does not promise survival. He does not promise victory. He says, "Today, we die well." And they charge. An old man at the front. Sword in hand. Blood soaking his armor. This should be the end. This should be where the story fades to black. But then, something happens. Something the Ottomans did not expect. Something almost forgotten. And this is where Act 6 begins. Because just when extinction is certain, Malta pulls off a miracle. And what happens next will change the balance of power in the Mediterranean forever. Stay with me. Because the worst, and the most incredible, is still coming. The charge should have been suicide. An old man leading half-dead knights into a city already bleeding out. Stone streets slick with blood. Smoke so thick it burns the lungs. Screams echoing from every direction at once. Jean de Valette moves forward anyway. Not fast. Not heroic. Just inevitable. Men later said he looked like death walking. And for a moment, just a moment, the Ottomans hesitate. Because something is wrong. This is not how defenders behave when they are finished. This is not panic. This is not desperation. This is controlled violence. The knights surge into the breach with a fury that feels personal. Swords crash against shields. Daggers find gaps in armor. Pikes punch through flesh at point-blank range. There is no shouting of commands anymore. Everyone knows what to do. Kill the man in front of you. Then the next. Then the next. Ali is there. The Janissary. He sees Valette for the first time up close. The old man's face is streaked with blood, some of it his own. His eyes are calm. Too calm. Ali swings his sword. It is knocked aside. A knight slams into him shoulder first, knocking the air from his lungs. He falls. Boots stamp past his head. Men scream. Somewhere nearby, a cannon fires at point-blank range, turning bodies into mist. Ali crawls behind a broken wall and curls up, shaking. This isn't war anymore. This is something else. And then, the impossible happens. The Ottoman assault stalls. Momentum dies. The attackers hesitate again. Because behind the defenders, something unexpected appears. Not soldiers. Civilians. Women. Old men. Boys barely tall enough to hold weapons. They are carrying rocks. Spears. Kitchen knives. And they are screaming. Not in fear. In rage. This is the forgotten truth of Malta. By this point, everyone is fighting. There is no rear. There is no reserve. There is only forward. Or death. The Ottomans pull back. Just a little. Enough for Valette to slam men into the gap. To pile rubble. To reinforce the breach with corpses if needed. And somehow, the city holds. For another day. This is the second false ending. Because survival today does not mean survival tomorrow. The defenders are nearly spent. They have no food reserves left. Water is being rationed by mouthfuls. Wounded men beg for death to escape infection. And worst of all, the Ottomans still have numbers. Still have guns. Still have time. Mustafa Pasha knows this. He changes tactics. No more reckless assaults. Now comes strangulation. Artillery never stops. Day and night. Sleep becomes impossible. Every building is a target. Every church is smashed. Every street becomes a killing zone. Bodies are no longer buried. There is no space. There is no strength. The dead are stacked in corners, bloating in the heat. The smell. The smell is everywhere. Sweet. Rotting. Unavoidable. Men gag as they fight. Matteo the fisherman hasn't slept properly in weeks. His hands are blistered raw. He no longer remembers how many men he has killed. He doesn't feel horror anymore. Just exhaustion. One night, while standing watch, he hears something strange. Not cannon fire. Not screams. Music. Ottoman drums. Flutes. A slow, deliberate rhythm. It is meant to break them. To remind them the enemy is still strong. Still organized. Still confident. Some defenders weep quietly. Others laugh hysterically. Matteo grips his spear and whispers a prayer he hasn't spoken since childhood. And then, a rumor spreads. Help is coming. From Sicily. Spanish troops. Fresh soldiers. A relief force. The rumor moves like wildfire. Men straighten. Eyes light up. Valette hears it too. And he does something dangerous. He does not deny it. Because hope, even false hope, keeps men alive. But days pass. No sails appear. The rumor begins to rot. Men ask questions. Whispers turn bitter. Did Europe abandon them? Were they sacrificed? Was this always meant to end here? Ali hears similar whispers in the Ottoman camp. The siege was supposed to be over by now. Supplies are running low. Disease is spreading. Flies cover everything. Men collapse from heat and exhaustion. Dragut is dead. Morale is slipping. Mustafa Pasha is furious. He orders one final, massive assault. Everything. All at once. If this fails, he knows the unthinkable may happen. The attack begins before dawn. Cannons thunder. Ladders go up. Explosions tear open walls.
The Ottoman pourrine.
Again. And this time, they break through. The fighting inside Burgu is worse than anything before. Men are hacked apart in alleys. Houses burn. Smoke suffocates. The defenders are pushed back step by step. Valette is nearly killed. A blow knocks him to the ground. A janissary raises a sword to finish him. A teenage boy, barely 16, drives a knife into the attacker's back. The boy dies seconds later. Valette watches it happen. He does not look away. This is the third human story. The boy's name is Luca. He was a baker's son. He had never held a weapon before this siege. And in his final moments, he saves the man holding the entire defense together. The line stabilizes. Barely. The Ottomans are in the city, but they cannot break through completely. And then, something extraordinary happens. A messenger arrives, covered in dust, barely able to stand. He reaches Valette and whispers 2 words. They've landed. At first, Valette doesn't react. Then it hits him. Relief forces. From Sicily. Not large. Not overwhelming. But real. Fresh men. Fresh weapons. Fresh hope. The Ottomans hear the news too. Confusion spreads. Mustafa Pasha hesitates. Is it a trap? A diversion? He cannot be sure. And in war, hesitation kills. The defenders launch a counterattack with everything they have left. Knights charge screaming. Militia follow. Civilians throw stones from rooftops. The Ottomans, exhausted, sick, battered, begin to fall back. And then, they break. Not in panic. In disbelief. The siege has gone on too long. The cost has been too high. This island was supposed to fall in weeks. It has devoured an army. Mustafa Pasha orders a withdrawal. Slow at first. Then faster. Then chaotic. Ali runs with the others. He does not look back. He does not feel relief. Only emptiness. After months of bloodshed. It is over. The Ottoman fleet pulls away from Malta. The defenders collapse where they stand. Some laugh. Some cry. Some stare at nothing. Valette removes his helmet. His hair is matted with blood and dust. He is shaking. Not from fear. From the release of tension that has kept him alive. Malta has survived. Against every possible expectation. But now comes the part history does not like to talk about. The aftermath. Because victory here did not feel like triumph. It felt like trauma. And what the defenders had become. Terrified Europe. That is where we go next. Because in part 4, you're going to see what winning really cost. And why the legacy of Malta is darker than most textbooks admit. Stay with me. You've come too far to stop now. When the guns finally go silent, the quiet is worse than the noise. No cheers echo across Malta. No triumphal shouts. No sense of victory. Just the sound of wind moving through broken stone. And flies. So many flies. They swarm over bodies left where they fell. Ottoman soldiers. Knights. Civilians. Some are missing limbs. Some are blackened by fire. Some are so bloated they barely look human anymore. The defenders don't celebrate. They wander. Like ghosts. Men stumble through streets they no longer recognize. Homes are piles of rubble. Churches are hollowed shells. The smell. It never leaves. Even years later, Survivors would say they could still smell Malta in their dreams. Jean de Valette does not allow rest. Not yet. Because he knows something terrible. A defeated army is still dangerous. The Ottomans may return. So the dead are cleared. Walls are reinforced with whatever materials remain. Captured weapons are gathered. Only when he is certain the island will not be immediately attacked again. Does Valette finally collapse? They carry him inside on a makeshift stretcher. The wounds he ignored are infected. His leg is swollen. Fever burns through him. Doctors say he should have died weeks ago. Maybe he did. And just didn't realize it. Now let's talk about the cost. Out of the original defenders, nearly half are dead. Some forts are annihilated entirely. The civilian population is devastated. Families wiped out. Children orphaned. Entire villages erased. Malta survived. But it is broken. And then comes the reckoning. Because news spreads. Across Europe. The Siege of Malta becomes legend almost immediately. Church bells ring in Rome. Kings send congratulations. Poets write about divine intervention. But behind closed doors, there is discomfort. Because the stories coming back are not clean. They are not heroic. They are savage. Accounts describe defenders fighting with teeth when blades broke. Women pouring boiling oil onto men's faces. Prisoners mutilated and displayed as warnings. There are whispers. Did the knights go too far? Did they become the very thing they claimed to oppose? Some ambassadors quietly admit the truth. If Malta had fallen, Europe would have fallen with it. And so, judgment is suspended. Valette is hailed as a savior. Money pours in. Engineers arrive. A new city is planned. A fortress so strong it will never fall. It will bear his name. Valletta. But the man himself? He does not enjoy his glory. Because he remembers. He remembers Luca, the baker's son. He remembers knights screaming in agony as limbs were crushed by cannon fire. He remembers the heads. The cannonballs. The moment he crossed a line he knew he could never uncross. Now let's return one last time to Ali. The Janissary. He survives the retreat. He returns home. But he is not welcomed as a hero. The campaign is considered a failure. An embarrassment. The Sultan is furious. Commanders are blamed. Careers end. Ali is haunted. He wakes at night hearing screams in languages he doesn't understand. He smells smoke where there is none. He cannot forget the faces of men who refuse to break. Years later, he tells his son something he has never said aloud before. There are places in this world that eat armies. Malta is one of them. Now here is the part history buried. The siege did not just stop Ottoman expansion. It changed how war was fought. After Malta, sieges become longer, more cautious. Direct assaults are reconsidered. Psychological warfare becomes more important. Fear is recognized as a weapon. And the knights? They are never the same. They become harder. More paranoid. More brutal. Because they know how close extinction came. Jean de Valette dies 3 years later. Not in battle. In his bed. But witnesses say he never truly rested. That he woke often at night, gripping sheets like sword hilts. The Siege of Malta becomes myth. Painted as light versus darkness. Faith versus empire. But you now know the truth. It was desperation versus annihilation. It was men pushed past morality into survival. It was victory at a cost that cannot be measured in numbers. And now, as we move into the final part of this story, I want you to hold on to one thought. The knights didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they convinced an empire that taking Malta was not worth the price. And that may be the most terrifying lesson of all. Because it means survival sometimes requires becoming something you can never undo. And in the final moments of this story, I'm going to give you something rare. Perspective. The kind that changes how you see history forever. Stay with me. You're about to understand why the Siege of Malta is not remembered for what it was, but for what it proved. And why now? You know the real story. The one almost no one ever hears. Now imagine this moment. Not during the siege. After. Weeks later. You are standing on the highest point of Malta, looking out over the same sea that once brought 40,000 men to your doorstep. The water is calm. Too calm. As if it's pretending nothing ever happened. But you know better. Because beneath that calm surface lies the truth no painting ever shows. Jean de Valette stands there too. Older than his years now. His armor is gone. His sword is not in his hand. For the first time in months, there is no enemy to face. And that is when the weight finally hits him. Not relief. Guilt. Because survival did not come clean. It came soaked in blood, fear, and choices that cannot be prayed away. This is the part history turns into footnotes. So let's pull it back into the light. After the Ottomans withdraw, Europe erupts in celebration. Malta becomes proof that the empire can be stopped. Rome breathes again. Spain feels vindicated. Christian Europe tells itself a comforting story. That God intervened. That faith triumphed. That good defeated evil. But if you walk the streets of Burgu in those days, you hear a different truth. You hear screams in the night from men reliving assaults. You hear widows sobbing into empty rooms. You see children staring at nothing, because they saw too much too early. Victory did not heal Malta. It scarred it. And Valette knows this better than anyone. He orders the construction of a new city not as a monument to triumph, but as an apology to the future. Valletta is built with geometry and brutality in mind. Angles designed to kill attackers. Walls designed to break bodies. Streets designed to funnel blood. It is a fortress shaped by trauma. Because Valette does not believe Malta will ever be safe again. And he is right. But what about the infamous moment you came here for? The heads. The cannonballs. Let's talk about that. The Ottomans were not shocked by death. They were veterans of conquest. They had destroyed cities larger than Malta. They had crucified enemies, impaled prisoners, enslaved populations. But Malta disturbed them. Because the knights did something psychologically different. They did not just kill. They communicated. When Ottoman heads were fired back across the harbor, it wasn't random cruelty. It was a message written in blood. We are not afraid of what you will do to us. That means you should be afraid of what we will do to you. This broke something. Even among janissaries trained from childhood to suppress fear. Ali later wrote, years after the siege, that Malta was the first time he saw veteran soldiers hesitate before attacking. Not because of walls, but because of defenders. Because men who have accepted death are terrifying. That is the hidden weapon of Malta. Not cannons. Not fortifications. Psychological annihilation. And it worked. The Ottoman command never fully recovered from the shock. The siege was meant to be a demonstration of unstoppable power. Instead, it became a lesson in limits. Mustafa Pasha returned to Constantinople disgraced. Careers ended quietly. Reports were edited. Losses downplayed. Because admitting the truth would have been worse than defeat. That a small, starving island made the empire bleed until it chose to walk away. Now here is the final false ending history gives you. That Malta saved Europe. It didn't. Not directly. The Ottomans would continue to fight for another century. They would still threaten Vienna. Still dominate much of the Mediterranean. But Malta did something more subtle. It shattered the myth of inevitability. Before Malta, resistance felt pointless. After Malta, it felt possible. And possibility changes everything. But there is one more human story you deserve to hear. Because it ties everything together. Years after the siege, an aging knight is asked what he remembers most. Not the battles. Not the cannons. Not the victory. He says this. The silence between assaults. That was when we learned who we really were. Because in those moments, when the guns stopped and the screams faded. Men were alone with their thoughts. Alone with what they had done. And what they would have to do again tomorrow. That is the real legacy of Malta. Not heroism. Endurance. Now think back to the opening image. The cannon firing a human head. You probably felt disgust. Shock. Maybe even disbelief. Good. You were supposed to. Because war is not meant to be cleanly admired from a distance. The Siege of Malta is not a story about glory. It is a story about what happens when extinction is placed on one side of the scale, and morality on the other. And extinction wins. Jean de Valette did not crush the Ottomans because he was cruel. He was cruel because he understood something most leaders never do. That mercy only exists when both sides can afford it. Malta could not. And neither could the men defending it. When Valette dies, he is buried without grandeur. No parade. No triumph. Just stone. And silence. But the city he built stands to this day. Not as a celebration. As a warning. That even the smallest place can become the most dangerous place on earth. When the people inside it decide there is no way out but through. You now know the real story of the Siege of Malta. Not the polished version. Not the sanitized one. But the one written in sweat, blood, fear, and choices that history prefers not to examine too closely. And that knowledge gives you something rare. Perspective. Because next time you hear about a miraculous victory, you'll ask a better question. What did it cost? And who paid the price? Most people will never hear this story like this. They will never sit with its discomfort. They will never understand why 40,000 men walked away from 7,000 who refused to break. But you do now. You were there. On the walls. In the smoke. In the silence between assaults. And once you've seen that, history never looks the same again.